Live. Become a WTTW Passport member today. Visit WTTW.com/passport now. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
See the Joffrey Ballet in Serenade by George Balanchine and the world premiere adaptation of Mice and Men by Kathy Marston. April 27th through May 8th at Lyric Opera House. Tickets at joffrey.org.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by an anonymous donor who is also proud to support Donors Choose, which helps people to empower teachers by funding classroom projects.
Wednesday night on PBS, starting with a new episode of Nature.
He was on the cusp of supremacy, a formidable contender to the throne.
Followed by a new episode of Nova.
There may be an avenue of slowing down this disease or, in fact, preventing it entirely.
And the finale of Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
All of that sweat, all that pain to get here and see this, that's what it's all about.
Nature, Nova, and Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
I'm Norma.
And I'm Gary. And you're watching WTTW Chicago.
Good evening and welcome to this special Best of Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. This evening, we head to the Chicago Tonight archive to bring you some of our favorite recent Chicago Tonight conversations and stories. And it all begins in just a moment, so don't go away.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
It's over a year into the COVID-19 pandemic and still so many unknowns about the virus. Among these, the mystery symptom of losing the senses of smell and taste. And joining us to discuss his research findings on how the virus is affecting those things is Dr. Sandeep Robert Datta, professor of neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Datta, thank you so much for being here. So you led a team that researched why these symptoms persist in so many COVID-19 patients. What did you find?
Yes, so we were really curious, I think like many people, how it is that this virus attacks your sense of smell and your sense of taste. And so together with a large team of international collaborators, we kind of probed the cells in your nose that are responsible for allowing you to smell. And through our research, we were able to propose one possible way that we think this virus is causing many of the people who get infected with the virus to lose their sense of smell.
All right, for the layperson, explain what that one possible way is.
Sure. So smells, odors, they're really chemicals that are floating through the air. And when you take a sniff into your nose, you inhale a bunch of these chemicals into your nose, and they travel to the back of your nose where there's a specialized tissue called the olfactory epithelium. And the olfactory epithelium has a bunch of different types of cells within it. One of the most important type of cell that lives in your olfactory epithelium is called a neuron. And these are neurons, just like the neurons in your, you think, but they don't live in your brain. They live actually inside of your nose. And they have little sensors that interact with chemicals that you're breathing in and sniffing through your nose. And when these neurons interact with odors, they send electrical signals to your brain that tells your brain what it is exactly you're smelling. Now, these neurons are really fragile, and they're surrounded by lots of cells called support cells that basically kind of physically support these neurons, help them stand up, They offer the neurons energy, and they make sure the ion balance around the cell is perfect. And these support cells are also essential for your sense of smell. And what we proposed in our research is that the virus is likely to act to cause you to lose your sense of smell by primarily infecting these support cells. And in work that's been done since the time my lab kind of got into this problem, from human patients, it seems pretty clear that this virus attacks the support cells in your nose, and in doing so causes most patients that have COVID to have some degree of smell loss.
And most patients do recover that smell and taste loss, but some have experienced this for 6 months or more, even a year. Has your research discovered anything into those cases?
Yeah, so again, as with everything in this pandemic, we're kind of learning as we go. What we think is that there are basically two kinds of patients. In the first kind, they get infected, the support cells get infected, there's a lot of inflammation, and that temporarily shuts down your sense of smell. And when you clear the virus, the inflammation goes away, the cells get better, the support cells get better, and then you can smell again. But in some patients, we think that the fact that these support cells get infected really causes damage to this olfactory epithelium, and actually might cause some of the neurons in your nose to die. And one of the very special things about the olfactory epithelium is that the neurons inside the epithelium can actually regenerate. They can regrow and rewire into your brain, but that takes time. And so we think that in some patients, they get infected with the virus and they lose the neurons that are responsible for your sense of smell, and those have to be rebuilt. And so that can often take months. And in some cases, we know now the pandemic has gone on, it can take more than a year.
They need to be rebuilt. And do patients actually have to do work to do that? And I bring this up because I'm sure you're aware, esteemed Harvard neurobiologist, of this video on social media of putting an orange on your burner and burning it, and then putting brown sugar on it, and poof, problem solved. I mean, any merit to this at all? And if not, is there a way to rebuild those neurons for patients that are experiencing these symptoms?
Yeah, I too was excited when I saw that video. It definitely circulated around my colleagues. Unfortunately, as far as I know, there's no scientific evidence that you can regain your sense of smell by just briefly smelling a burnt orange. There is some evidence for something called smell therapy, where you get some common smells that are pretty strong, things like peppermint oil or maybe cloves, and a couple times a day, you smell them and you tell yourself what they are. And it's thought through mechanisms we don't really understand that this experience with familiar smells repeatedly might improve the rate at which you recover. And there is actually some clinical evidence, although it's not very strong, there is some evidence that supports that as a strategy to help people with long-term loss of their sense of smell perhaps recover more quickly.
All right, Dr. Sandeep Datta, very interesting research, a lot that you and your team are still discovering about this very strange but pervasive symptom for COVID-19. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/dailybriefing and sign up.
Plenty of us take pictures of the skyline, the lakefront, or Millennium Park. But a loose affiliation of photographers explores the city through its neglected places. At personal risk and sometimes legal jeopardy, they look for beauty in forgotten and faded locales. Producer Mark Vitale met one such photographer in search of abandoned Chicagoland.
Time seems to stand still as built environments are slowly reclaimed by nature. The settings might suggest Stephen King or bring to mind heavy metal album covers. But where some see scary, others see opportunity.
We would just drive around, and sometimes you'd find stuff that's in plain sight, but that, that was compelling. And this is one of them.
This is by Steelworkers Park at 87th and the Lakefront, where massive concrete walls once held iron ore bound for the U.S. steel plant known as Southworks.
It's interesting to come to a place like this and try to imagine, okay, well, what was this like in the 60s when, the steel mills across the street were still humming?
Jerry Olejniczak has a blue-collar day job with an auto detailer. His hobby has grown into a dedicated side hustle. His first book on the subject rediscovers abandoned Chicagoland, from Kenosha to Gary and all points between. There are no people in the photos. Sometimes it looks like they left in a hurry, or might return at any moment.
There's a baseline sort of sadness and poignancy to almost all these shots, but strictly on an aesthetic level, I think decay can be beautiful. You know, the American Rust Belt obviously is a gold mine for this kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go with the photograph. You can be very sort of documentarian, just show it as it is and kind of leave it be, but the camera is different than the human eye. So the human eye sees things a little differently. So sometimes you actually need a decent amount of tweaking, at least that's what I do, to have the same emotional resonance that it did when you were there looking at it.
Olenichak is part of an unofficial alliance of like-minded photographers around the world. They practice so-called urbex photography, named for urban exploration, though it's not always strictly urban.
The urbex community is really a network, and you know, you talk people up and you make connections because, you know, I mean, I might be able to find almost everything that there is to find around Chicago, but you know, I'm not going to be able to do that in New York or Detroit or St. Louis. So you got to count on people to, you know, give you some intel.
I've known Jerry Olenichak for about 10 years. He's always planning his next photography trip that might take him from Saskatchewan to Chernobyl.
The opportunity to see a former town of 50,000 people that's left almost intact, you know, plus of course with the history that goes along with it is incredible. So it was worth the trip.
Olenichak had a guide on that trip, but many excursions might involve a bit of actual trespassing.
There's definitely legal risks. Those are honestly the thing that I worry about the most. There's some places where nobody cares if you're in, and then there's some places where if you get caught, you know, it's a felony or a misdemeanor or jail time or something like that.
And with personal hazards everywhere, the urbex photographer is wise to shoot with a group.
Let's face it, some of these places can be a little risky. I mean, I've had a friend fall through the floor in a department store, and I had to pull her out.
Urbex photography even has a derisive nickname, ruin porn.
I would like to think that the difference between ruin porn versus what I put out is the difference between pornography and tasteful erotica. This is a great hobby, and for any of those that are interested in maybe trying it out, be cautious, wear good shoes, and always wear long pants. And do it legally, kids. Do it legally.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The book, Abandoned Chicagoland, was just published. You can visit our website to find out more about the photographer and to see a slideshow of his work. As journalists, we often work to avoid becoming part of the stories we cover. But sometimes the story is a part of us. Last month, my friend Sonia Anderson's stepson Miles was shot and killed 2 days before his 19th birthday. Miles usually lived in Northbrook, but was in Austin visiting his father, Sonia's former partner, with whom she shares a 10-year-old son. Last week, I sat down with Sonia to talk as friends, as mothers of black sons, and as two people who've spent a lot of time thinking about issues of violence, equity, and the narrative. Me as a journalist, she as a longtime civic and nonprofit leader. We first shared this story on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Here's another look at that conversation that begins with how Miles first came into her life.
I met Miles when he was about 4.5. It's the time I met his father. We started dating, and his father said to me fairly early on in our relationship, I have a son, and if this relationship is going to progress, it's really important that you get to know my son as well. And I have such a clear recollection of the very first time I went to go meet Miles. I was so nervous, like so nervous. And as you know, I mean, I spend a lot of time talking in front of people. I spend a lot of time in front of audiences. I don't think I've ever been as afraid in my life as I was standing in front of the door about to meet Miles for the first time. And I rang the doorbell. He opened the door in that 4.5-year-old precocious kind of way and immediately just started chattering my ear off as if we had known each other for all our lives. And that just kind of sums up who he was, right? He was a people person. He was a person who attended to others and cared for others. He was the consummate big brother. He was a good son. He was a good friend. He was a good kid.
So take us back to July 7th. How did the family learn what happened?
Yeah, it was Thursday morning, about 3 weeks ago, I guess now. I was here at home. My son was with his dad in Austin. Miles generally lived in Northbrook with his mom and stepfather, but of course, because his dad is in Austin, he would come to visit on a regular basis. And we would always try to organize it so that whenever Miles would be at his dad, my son would be at his dad's also, so that the boys could be together. It was really important to us that they spend a lot of time together. There's a 9-year age difference between the two of them, so we wanted to make sure that they were close and that they had a really strong bond and strong relationship. So they were expecting Miles to arrive sometime the night before. My son got up that morning, noticed that Miles's room was untouched. His bed had not been slept in, looked out of the back window, which overlooks the backyard, and he saw his brother lying in the backyard. He let his dad know that Miles was out in the backyard. It was super early in the morning, and then my son, being the child that he is, decided to go out and see what was going on. He thought Miles was asleep in the backyard because he had just turned 10 a few weeks prior, and that's the sense that he could make of it.
Why
that
would he think anything else?
Why would he think anything else? Miles must be asleep in the backyard. And he went out and he tried to rouse Miles, called his name, shook him. No response, obviously. Eventually noticed the blood, ran back inside, alerted his dad, and then called 911.
I have a lot of questions hearing that, right? Just as, you know, a mother of Black sons as well, one of them who shares the same name as your stepson, Miles. One of the first things that I thought about the trauma that Jonah is then going to carry. What are your thoughts on that? And, you know, as a mom and a professional, how are you addressing that?
When I think about what I call the book of Jonah's life, there is now squarely a chapter, right? That is July 2021, the day that his brother was murdered and the day that he discovered his brother's body. So, you know, I'm one of the lucky ones, despite this you know, horrendous thing that's befallen us. I'm one of the lucky ones. I have access, I have resources, I have a network that immediately swooped in. And one of the things that we did right away was reach out to counselors who specialize in working with young people who've experienced grief or trauma. So this happened on a Thursday morning. Friday morning, we were, as a family, sitting on a couch talking to a therapist, and we've continued to see her on a regular basis since then.
What are your thoughts on the number of children and adults, really, who experience what Jonah has experienced quite frequently, unfortunately, and their lack of access to mental health care? What needs to be happening in those communities? Obviously, that's not the only solution to Chicago's violence problem, but it's part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I am struck by the fact that in this particular case that, you know, Jonah had lived a reasonably happy and, you know, well-loved life up until this particular defining moment. So his before was, you know, for the most part, you know, rainbows and sunny skies. His after, I hope, will be mostly rainbows and sunny skies. But he had this one singular defining moment. But the reality of it is there are young people in the city every single day, right now as we speak, who have a before that has not been full of rainbows and sunny skies, who've experienced trauma, and then that trauma will be succeeded by additional trauma or other challenges. And so if anything, this has really just underscored for me the importance of investing in social and emotional learning, investing in mental health supports, investing in all kinds of ways in which we can support the well-being of young people. Because if this happened to us and it's left such an indelible mark on us, and we have resources, we have ways to address and access the supports that we need, what does this mean for other families, other young people who don't have this access? And as a city, we have to understand that there has to be a better way to support young folks to get through some of these struggles that they encounter every day.
Lastly, Sonia, how do you want Miles to be remembered? What do you want people to take away from learning about his story? There's
a real piece of me that feels like if this if this shows us nothing else, it shows us that we're all connected in this story and in this journey together. I'll be really candid and say the outpouring of support to me and my family has been incredible. I mean, folks from every single sector of my life, and I mean every single sector, have reached out with words of encouragement and support. And I think that's because, of course, it was such a horrific act. Of course, people know and care about me. But I also think implicit in this is, for many people, particularly folks who work in the sector that I work in, I just might, I don't know this for a fact, but I have a strong suspicion, I just might be the first person, like the embodiment of the first person they've known personally that something like this has happened to, who's been around their dinner table, who meets them for happy hour, who sits in meetings with them. I'm a peer and a colleague, and that brings a proximity to this issue that I think we sometimes have the luxury of intellectualizing, but not necessarily feeling in our hearts and in our souls. And I think for folks who know me, this has really landed in a particular kind of way. The other thing that I keep thinking about is, I've been saying none of us is safe until all of us are safe, right? And I think about the work that I do every single day. As you know a little bit about my background. I have 2 Ivy League degrees, right? I have traveled all over the world. I have worked for some of the most prominent leaders in this country, right? I have devoted my entire life to issues around equity and access, and now specifically to boys and young men of color. And I could not save, right, one of the boys of color in my own life, which to me means if I couldn't do it, right, if my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. And I don't say that to be alarmist or to use scare tactics. I say it to say we are truly all in this together. There are no boundaries between Northbrook and Chicago, or Oak Park and Chicago, or Evanston and Chicago, or the Gold Coast. And we are a community, we are a city. And until we really start to realize that one problem is all of our problems, one opportunity is all of our opportunity, then we're never going to really solve for this and maximize the potential that our communities and our young people have.
And in a prescient video posted to social media last year, Miles encouraged his friends not to let the isolation of the pandemic stop them from reaching out to people they care about. As he put it then, tomorrow isn't promised. A good reminder for us all. You can find that video and more of my interview with Sonia on our website. Tucked away in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, there's a record label breathing new life into forgotten music of the past. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia explores the musical world of Numero Group.
Music has always been a driving force for Andre Gibson. More than 40 years ago, while in college, he formed the Universal Togetherness Band.
During the process of our performing, we were recording. We were getting all this free recording time from Columbia College, the engineering department.
In 1982, the group performed on the local variety TV show, The Chicago Party.
We did this tune called Pull Up, and that's the rest is history. We had these red satin outfits on, and with the fringes that my mom had made for us, and it was pretty cool.
After a potential deal with Mercury Records fell through, the band broke up in the mid-'80s without releasing any music. That was until the Chicago record label Numero Group discovered the band while combing through the TV show's archives for a separate project.
The main obstacle to them being discovered before this is that they had never put out any records whatsoever. So really there was a very small chance of Universal Togetherness Band ever being discovered, and we got lucky enough to discover them.
More than 30 years after Gibson recorded the music, Numero Group released it to the world. Rob Sevier and Ken Shipley started Numero Group in 2003. The archival music label specializes in releasing music from forgotten artists of the past.
So we have what's known as the hits, right? You've got your Frank Sinatras, your Earth, Wind & Fires, your Pat Benatars, whatever, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that's underneath there that for one reason or another didn't make it, right? So for an artist like T.L. Barrett, for instance, it's like, you know, his Like a Ship is, to me, probably a better record than Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace, but circumstance and timing kind of kept it down, and now it's being, you know, because of our work, it's being lifted back up to its sort of rightful place.
Nobody knows all my sorrow.
Southside pastor and gospel singer T.L. Barrett recorded music in the 1970s with his youth choir that's now being sampled by Kanye West, DJ Khaled, and used in TV, film, and advertisements.
It is really wonderful. No, but not just for me, but for those young people that I promised that their labor would be productive and that they would hear their songs on the radio. I didn't know it was going to take this long, but that it would be trending. And now they are telling their children and their grandchildren, that's me. I'm in the alto section. You know, it's really beautiful.
Numero Group releases music spanning several genres, from the 1950s to about 2000. Shipley says online data helps direct the label.
What's so fascinating about what's happening in the digital space now is that the stats are telling us what people like. So you can look at something and be like, God, this has got 1 million streams. Maybe we should press that because this artist has 400,000 followers, and now there's an opportunity to maybe sell a lot of records.
This was mine.
Gibson says this musical second chance opens new doors for him.
I see a resurgence of old school being meshed up with the new beats. They have the technology, but they're looking for the content. And see, I got a full bag of content. Where there is love, filled with desire.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Evan Garcia.
Let it take you higher. Where there is love.
Numero Group says their standard agreement with artists is a 50-50 equal split of profits. You can visit our website to hear more music from Gibson, Barrett, and other Numero Group musicians.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that'll do it for this evening's Best of Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Next time on Benjamin Franklin, Revolution.
Choosing sides means choosing fates.
Diplomacy.
Franklin had a difficult assignment.
And a final cause.
It's the first debate in American history on slavery.
Don't miss the conclusion of Benjamin Franklin.
Tonight at 8 on WTTW.
Wednesday night on PBS, starting with a new episode of Nature.
He was on the cusp of supremacy, a formidable contender to the throne.
Followed by a new episode of Nova.
There may be an avenue of slowing down this disease or, in fact, preventing it entirely.
And the finale of Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
All of that sweat, all that pain to get here and see this, that's what it's all about.
Nature, Nova, and Expedition with Steve Backshall Unpacked.
Next time on Jay's Chicago,
the top competitive storyteller in Chicago tells about